I froze as Daniel stood in front of me, surrounded by 20 business partners in his expensive conference room on the 42nd floor of downtown. His grin was slow and deliberate, cruel in a way I'll never forget. My older brother, the one who was supposed to protect me, looked at me like I was nothing but a piece of trash he wanted to sweep away. "Catherine," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard him clearly, "you'll never amount to anything. That proposal you're bragging about, I rejected it on your behalf. You're not ready for real work. You're just wasting everyone's time here." Heat flushed across my face immediately. My fists shook at my sides uncontrollably. The whispers from the business partners stung sharper than any slap could have ever done. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry right there in that conference room. I wanted to run out and never come back. Instead, I clenched my jaw tight and made a silent promise to myself. This humiliation would not define me. I would not let Daniel's words be my destiny. Something inside me shifted that moment. Something fierce and determined woke up inside my chest, angry and ready. Driving home through the rain, the city lights blurred past my tears completely. Every word Daniel said replayed in my mind like a broken record, like a hammer hitting me over and over again relentlessly. The way his partners had laughed mockingly. The way he'd looked at me with such complete disgust and contempt. Felt powerless. Felt small. But underneath all that pain, a spark ignited in my chest. A fire that burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt. He thinks he's won, I thought to myself bitterly. He thinks he can crush me and move on with his life like nothing happened. But he just made the biggest mistake of his entire life. He just lit the fire that'll burn his world down completely. I wiped my tears away with the back of my hand and made a decision right there in my car. I would show Daniel Monroe exactly what I was made of. I would prove him wrong. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. A bank notification confirming my first investment loan had been approved. Maybe the universe was telling me something important. Maybe this was my sign that the timing was right. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, and started writing down a plan. A week later, dinner at home was worse than the conference room humiliation had been. Daniel paraded his arrogance around our parents' table like it was a trophy he'd won in a competition. "Catherine. She's cute trying, isn't she?" he sneered to our father, cutting into his expensive steak with unnecessary force. "Always chasing these little dreams. It's almost sad, really, watching her struggle." My mother shot him a look that could kill, but she didn't say anything to stop him. She never did. She never stood up for me. I noticed something important that night, though. An open envelope on the kitchen counter, carelessly left in plain sight like he wanted someone to see it. Inside were property documents. His property documents. I didn't touch them directly, but I read every single word carefully. That envelope was like opportunity whispering in my ear, telling me something crucial and important. His house was part of his business portfolio. His house was the foundation of everything he'd built and bragged about. That night, I realized something crucial that changed everything. I needed to understand completely how he'd built his empire. If I wanted to compete with him, I needed to know every detail. For the next 3 months, I buried myself in books, webinars, and legal forums constantly. Real estate investment, financial strategy, investment law, property mortgages, foreclosure loopholes, bankruptcy procedures. I devoured everything like my life depended on it. I attended weekend seminars in different cities. I read until my eyes hurt and my vision blurred. I took notes on everything I learned. My tiny apartment became completely covered with sticky notes and documents and spreadsheets everywhere. My friends thought I was absolutely crazy. My parents asked repeatedly when I was going to stop wasting my time with this financial stuff. But I couldn't stop. I was hungry for knowledge. I was hungry for power. I was hungry for revenge. And then, about 4 months into my intense research, I realized something that changed everything about my plan. Daniel's house and business were dangerously over-leveraged. He'd borrowed too much money against properties that weren't actually worth what he'd promised the banks. He was standing on a house of cards, And he didn't even know it yet. One strong wind could blow it all down. I just needed to figure out how to be that wind. 6 months after that humiliating conference room moment, I landed my first independent consulting client successfully. It wasn't a huge deal, just a small real estate firm that needed help organizing their finances and systems. But it felt like tasting freedom for the first time. Daniel had dismissed me publicly, had told me I'd never amount to anything, but here I was, building something real. Building something that was mine and mine alone. I worked late into the nights on that project without complaining. I made sure every number was perfect. I made sure every detail was exactly right. When I delivered my work, my client was so impressed that she referred me to 3 other companies immediately. Then those companies referred me to more people. Then those companies referred me to even more. The work started flowing in like a river. Each project was like a stepping stone building toward something bigger. Each success was proof that Daniel was wrong about me. And the best part, he had absolutely no idea what I was doing. He was too busy bragging about his own success to notice that his little sister was quietly building an empire of her own in the background. I started attending networking events around the city more frequently each month. Real estate conferences, business mixers, investment seminars, financial planning workshops. At these events, I moved silently and professionally, never drawing unnecessary attention. I didn't brag about myself. I didn't make a scene or demand recognition. I just listened carefully, asked smart questions. I took detailed notes. And something interesting started happening gradually over time. Daniel's business peers began noticing me in positive ways. They whispered doubts about him to each other. "Your brother's leveraged too heavily," one investor told me over coffee one afternoon. "He's got too much debt. One bad quarter and he's finished completely." Another said, "Daniel's arrogant. He doesn't listen to advice. He's going to crash eventually." My presence alone began sowing seeds of change in his business circle. People started questioning whether Daniel was really as stable as he claimed publicly. People started wondering if there were better investment opportunities elsewhere. I wasn't doing anything illegal or unethical. I was just being visible. I was just being smart. I was just being everything Daniel said I could never be. By year 2, I had enough savings accumulated to make my first major investment move carefully. I bought a small property near Daniel's home strategically. It was a subtle step, nothing that would raise alarm bells or suspicion, but it was part of a larger plan I'd been forming. The property was in a good neighborhood, close enough to Daniel's main house that I could keep an eye on things, but far enough away that it didn't seem suspicious to him. I started renovating it carefully, turning it into rental income that would support my future plans. The money from that rental property helped me save for my next investment. And my next. And my next after that. Each property I bought brought me closer to understanding the real estate market completely. Each investment taught me something new about how people like Daniel built their empires. And then I discovered something that made my heart race with excitement and fear. Daniel's house, the big beautiful mansion he loved to brag about constantly, was tied to a high-risk loan. The kind of loan that could be called in if certain conditions weren't met. The kind of loan that could destroy everything he'd built. Sometimes at night I felt angry beyond belief. Burning, hot, desperate anger that made me want to scream at the top of my lungs. But I learned to channel that anger into something productive. Instead of rage, I found clarity. Humiliation had sharpened my focus like a knife on a stone. I worked tirelessly, building my consulting firm while keeping Daniel completely blind to my progress. I registered my business under a slightly different name, one that didn't immediately connect back to me or my family. I opened it in a different part of the city. I built a brand identity that was separate from my family name. Daniel never suspected anything unusual. He was too focused on himself. He was too arrogant to imagine that his little sister could be building something significant. I took contracts that taught me more about his business vulnerabilities. I studied his financial moves like a chess player studying an opponent. Every mistake he made, I noted it down carefully. Every shortcut he took, I documented it completely. I was becoming the expert he would never be. By year 3, something powerful had shifted fundamentally in the business world. I began quietly networking with Daniel's business circle, offering my consulting services under my new brand. And they came to me. They hired me willingly. They trusted me. They respected my work. Daniel bragged constantly about being untouchable, about having the strongest business in the city. He had no idea I was the shadow in the room, the one who was slowly reshaping how his peers viewed him. I helped his competitors understand the real estate market better than before. I gave advice to investors who were considering whether to work with Daniel. I didn't say anything bad about him. I didn't need to say anything negative. I just shared knowledge. I just told the truth plainly. And the truth was that Daniel's business model was becoming outdated and inefficient. The truth was that better opportunities existed elsewhere. It was like playing chess, and I was 3 moves ahead of everyone else on the board. My consulting business grew exponentially. My reputation grew stronger. My network expanded. And Daniel's world, though he didn't know it yet, was slowly shrinking. In year 3, I made a strategic move that seemed small to everyone but was actually huge and monumental. I purchased a minor stake in one of Daniel's potential investment properties carefully and deliberately. I bought it through a holding company, through multiple layers of legal structures that made it nearly impossible to trace back to me or my family. The stake was small enough that it didn't raise red flags immediately. It was large enough that I had legal rights and access to financial information. When Daniel found out about my involvement, and he eventually did, he actually laughed out loud mockingly. He laughed at me in front of everyone at the dinner table. "You bought a stake in my property," he said at a family dinner, his voice dripping with contempt and superiority. "That's cute, Catherine. That's like a mouse trying to fight a lion. It's pathetic, really." My parents laughed along with him immediately. My mother patted my hand like I was a child who needed comforting. But I just smiled mysteriously. I knew something Daniel didn't know yet. That mouse was about to become very, very dangerous indeed. I had documents prepared that he didn't understand. I had lawyers standing by. I had everything positioned perfectly. The stake I'd purchased gave me voting rights on future decisions. It gave me access to the property's financial records. It gave me power that he couldn't even comprehend. And I was just getting started with my plan. Over the next year, Daniel made a series of reckless financial decisions that shocked absolutely everyone in the business community. He invested in projects that seemed questionable and risky to anyone paying attention. He ignored warnings from experienced financial advisors repeatedly. He took out more loans against properties that were already heavily mortgaged and leveraged. I watched it all unfold like I was reading a tragedy that I'd already memorized completely. I took notes on every mistake meticulously and carefully. Every misstep, every poor decision built my roadmap perfectly. I understood now exactly where his vulnerabilities were located. I understood exactly where he would break under pressure. It was like watching someone walk toward a cliff in the dark, and I could see the cliff clearly with perfect vision. I could see exactly where he was going to fall. My consulting business was booming by this point beyond belief. I had more clients than I could handle properly. I was making real money consistently. I was building real wealth steadily. And I was being incredibly smart about it strategically. Every penny I made went into my larger plan carefully. Every investment I made was strategic and calculated. Every move I made was calculated and precise. I started creating backup plans. If one avenue closed, I had 5 others ready to go. I was operating like a chess grandmaster who'd already visualized 20 moves ahead. I hired a lawyer, a brilliant woman named Victoria Chen who specialized in property law and financial disputes extensively. Victoria didn't know the full story of my plan, but she didn't need to know everything immediately. I simply explained that I wanted to monitor certain properties carefully, that I wanted to understand my legal options regarding some real estate holdings completely. Victoria was professional and discreet about everything we discussed. She began documenting everything systematically and thoroughly. She secured the paperwork that would make my future claim on Daniel's properties legally ironclad and unbreakable by any means. She explained the conditions under which I could potentially acquire properties through foreclosure legally. She walked me through every legal avenue available to me carefully. She introduced me to her network of other lawyers who specialized in different areas. Some handled bankruptcy cases. Some handled property transfers. Some handled fraudulent claims. My future claim on Daniel's house became more solid with each passing month that went by. The legal shield I was building was strong and unbreakable by anyone. Even if Daniel hired the best lawyers in the country, they wouldn't be able to argue with the paperwork we'd prepared meticulously. Everything was airtight legally. Alone at night in my apartment, I felt moments of real fear and uncertainty. Real doubt about everything. What if this fails? I'd think to myself anxiously late at night. What if Daniel recovers from all this somehow? What if I've spent 5 years building this plan and it all falls apart? What if he hires better lawyers than mine? But determination always overpowered doubt every single time. I would remind myself of that conference room clearly and vividly. I would remember his voice saying I'd never amount to anything. I would recall the pain of that moment in detail. And that fear would turn back into fuel for my determination. I started keeping a journal where I wrote down all my fears. Then I'd write down the facts that disproved each fear. This exercise helped me enormously. A tip from a family friend confirmed something incredibly important and game-changing. Daniel's property was becoming increasingly vulnerable to attack from multiple angles. The bank was starting to ask questions about his debt levels carefully. People were starting to doubt whether he could pay back what he owed honestly. The cliff he was walking toward was getting closer every single day. The end was coming. I could feel it in my bones with absolute certainty. I was ready for whatever came next. I positioned myself to act the instant Daniel faltered and showed weakness visibly. He boasted publicly about his invulnerability constantly and repeatedly. He gave interviews to business magazines about how he was unstoppable and recession-proof and untouchable. That arrogance was his weakness and his fatal flaw. That perfect timing for the power shift was coming inevitably. I could taste it on my tongue. I prepared my team carefully and thoroughly with every detail. I prepared my lawyers completely with all documentation ready. I prepared my financial advisors with contingency plans. I prepared my real estate contacts with all necessary information. Everything was in place perfectly. Everything was ready to go at a moment's notice. I was like a runner in the starting blocks, waiting for the gun to fire its signal. And I knew that gun was going to fire very, very soon. Daniel was too busy bragging to notice the trap closing around him completely. I had people watching him now. Consultants who reported back to me. Business contacts who told me his moves. Bankers who shared information. I was hearing about his decisions almost immediately after he made them. I had eyes and ears everywhere in his business world. The first shock came on a Tuesday morning in early spring of year 5 unexpectedly. A contractor threatened foreclosure on one of Daniel's commercial properties very publicly and loudly. The contractor claimed Daniel hadn't paid for months of work. Actual months, spanning back almost a year. Daniel panicked visibly in ways I'd never seen before. I could see it in the news articles, in the gossip that spread through business circles rapidly. For the first time, cracks were showing in his perfect facade that everyone believed in. Meanwhile, I remained calm and composed throughout. I remained calculating and strategic. I measured my legal advantage carefully. I watched and waited patiently for the right moment. The dominoes were starting to fall finally, one by one, getting closer and closer to the biggest domino of all. His house. Called Victoria immediately. "It's starting," I told her. She understood without me needing to explain anything. We reviewed our documentation one more time. Everything was ready. I felt a rush of adrenaline but kept my emotions in check professionally. The countdown had begun in earnest and with serious momentum finally. Daniel scrambled desperately and frantically to save his house from foreclosure and financial ruin. He called banks repeatedly and urgently. He called investors desperately trying to make deals. He tried to restructure his loans with different financial institutions. He grew paranoid, suspicious that someone was working against him actively and deliberately. He was right about that, but he'd never figure out who was orchestrating it all. I watched patiently from the shadows, staying silent and invisible. Every misstep he took brought me closer to victory exponentially. Every desperate move he made weakened his position further and further. He was like a trapped animal, thrashing around frantically, unable to find the exit from the cage. And I was standing right outside the cage, watching it all happen with quiet satisfaction and resolve. I documented everything. Every bank call, every deal attempt, every desperate move. This documentation would be valuable later. I wanted a clear record of how he'd tried and failed. I wanted evidence of his panic and desperation. I made my most important strategic move in year 5 carefully and deliberately. I maneuvered my consulting firm to take on clients who overlapped directly with Daniel's business operations and connections. I positioned myself to understand his contracts completely and thoroughly. I identified his weaknesses systematically and methodically. I found his partnerships that were vulnerable to pressure and leverage. I helped other companies understand that they could get better deals elsewhere for cheaper prices. I weakened him legally and financially without ever breaking a single law or ethical code. It was business. It was strategic. It was brilliant and calculated. Daniel grew suspicious around this time inevitably. He started asking questions about me persistently. He wondered why my name kept coming up in conversations with his business contacts consistently. He tried to figure out what I was doing. But by then it was too late. The storm was already positioned. The hurricane was already moving toward him relentlessly and unstoppably. I got a phone call from an associate of Daniel's. "He knows something's wrong," the person told me. "He's asking about you specifically. He thinks you're involved in something." Smiled. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him panic. I quietly acquired the loan documents tied to Daniel's house through completely legal channels and proper procedures. A friend of a friend knew someone at the bank who could provide documents to authorized parties. Everything was above board completely. Everything was legal and legitimate, but I now had access to the paperwork that mattered most critically. I could see exactly how much Daniel owed down to the penny. I could see exactly when the payments were due month by month. I could see the clauses that would trigger foreclosure if he missed even one payment or violated any conditions. I studied those documents meticulously. I understood every single detail. I knew more about his mortgage than he did probably. Everything aligned perfectly in my favor. He was speeding toward collapse without realizing it completely. The pieces were in place strategically. The trap was set carefully. I just needed to wait for him to step into it unwittingly. Victoria called me. "All the paperwork is ready," she said confidently. "When you give the signal, we move forward. We're completely prepared for every scenario." I wrestled with conflicting feelings as the final days approached rapidly and tensions mounted. Satisfaction versus compassion. Revenge versus justice. Was this right? Was this what I actually wanted deep down? I reminded myself over and over again persistently. This is justice, not cruelty. He humiliated me publicly in front of his associates. He told me I'd never amount to anything significant. He tried to crush my dreams in front of an audience deliberately. This isn't about revenge or personal vendetta. This is about showing him that he was wrong about me. This is about proving that I am worth something valuable. This is about building something real and powerful from the ashes of his cruelty. Those thoughts gave me peace and clarity. They made me sleep better at night without guilt. I called my best friend and told her what I'd done. She was shocked but supportive. "He deserves this," she said. "After how he treated you." I wasn't sure if he deserved this exactly, but I was sure that he needed to learn a lesson. And this lesson would be unforgettable for him. Daniel was desperate by the end of everything, reaching a breaking point. He called banks repeatedly, lawyers everywhere, and mutual contacts for help desperately. He tried literally everything he could imagine. He borrowed from investors. He sold assets at a loss knowing the consequences. He did everything he could think of to save his house. But it was never going to be enough because I'd already closed all the doors. I remained composed through it all, watching him unravel completely. I watched his business crumble into dust. I watched his reputation suffer immensely. And I felt almost nothing emotionally. Not satisfaction. No joy. Just a quiet certainty that this was how it had to happen. That this was the only way he would ever understand what it meant to be powerless. I received reports from my network. Daniel had lost weight. He wasn't sleeping. He was drinking heavily. He was depressed and desperate. Part of me felt pity for him. But I remembered his voice in that conference room. I remembered the cruelty in his eyes. And I kept moving forward with my plan. Daniel attempted a last-minute deal to save his house desperately and frantically. He found an investor willing to help him with emergency funding. He tried to restructure everything one final time. But my legal team was ready and waiting. We filed the right paperwork immediately. We made the right objections systematically. We made sure his escape route was sealed shut completely and permanently. We blocked every avenue he tried to use. His arrogance had fueled his downfall completely. He'd never taken me seriously. He'd never imagined that I could be smart enough, strong enough, or brave enough to do something like this. That was his fatal mistake that cost him everything. And now he was paying the price for that arrogance. Victoria called me with the news. "It's done," she said simply. "The foreclosure is proceeding. There's nothing he can do to stop it now." I felt a rush of emotions. Relief, victory, sadness, everything at once. Daniel finally understood the extent of my rise and power completely. He was too late to do anything. The foreclosure notice bore my name clearly and officially. The property was being transferred to me through a series of legal proceedings that he had absolutely no power to stop or reverse. I owned his house finally. The house he loved deeply. The house he'd bragged about constantly to everyone. The house that represented everything he thought made him better than me. It was mine now. I'd taken it from him through legal, legitimate means completely. I'd outmaneuvered him completely in every way possible. The transaction would be finalized in 2 weeks. I prepared myself mentally for the confrontation that was coming. I knew Daniel would want to see me. He would want answers. And I would give them to him. But on my terms completely. I walked into the house calmly on the day it became legally mine officially. Daniel was there waiting for me. His eyes widened when he saw me. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Disbelief was written across his entire face. You bought my house," he stammered quietly. His voice was broken. His confidence was gone completely. I smiled thinly. "I didn't ruin you," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself. You took on too much debt. You made reckless decisions. I just understood the game better than you did." He collapsed onto the marble floor of the foyer. The floor he'd once walked across with such arrogance. He cried. He actually cried. And I felt nothing but a cold, quiet satisfaction. I calmly outlined every strategic move that had put me in control completely and precisely. No yelling. No humiliation or mockery. Just facts and evidence. I explained how I'd networked carefully with his contacts. How I'd learned the market thoroughly and completely. How I'd positioned myself perfectly at every turn. How I'd been patient and strategic. Daniel had nothing left. Socially, financially, emotionally. His business had collapsed into nothing. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. His house was gone to his sister. And his little sister, the one he said would never amount to anything, was standing in his house as its owner. I watched as the reality of it all hit him hard like a physical blow. I watched as he understood that he'd underestimated me completely. I watched as he realized that his words, his cruelty, his dismissal, they'd all backfired on him in the worst possible way. "Why?" he asked me, his voice hoarse. "Why would you do this?" I looked at him coldly. "You told me I'd never amount to anything. You humiliated me publicly. You dismissed me. I wanted you to understand what that felt like. Now you do." I stepped outside the house, stepping onto the lawn that was now my property completely and permanently. The sun was setting over the city, painting everything orange and gold and purple and red. I reflected on my 5-year journey with complete satisfaction and pride. Daniel's downfall was complete and total. I was free finally. I was strong. I was unbroken. The lessons I'd learned were invaluable and permanent forever. Patience outlasts arrogance always and consistently. Intelligence beats cruelty every single time. Discipline defeats laziness without fail. Hard work creates power and opportunity. And most importantly, sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone else out of spite. It's becoming so successful that their attempts to destroy you become completely irrelevant and meaningless. I took a deep breath and smiled genuinely. Done it. I'd actually done it. And the best part, Daniel would spend the rest of his life knowing that his little sister had beaten him at his own game completely. That knowledge would haunt him forever. And that, I thought, was the sweetest victory of all. I owned his house now. But more importantly, I owned my life and my destiny.